The MMO Holy Trinity is something I've been thinking and talking about privately for some time now, and I realize that I have a fairly complicated view on the subject, which if you don't know is exactly the kind of topic that makes for a perfect open letter. There are many sides to this issue, more than the simple for versus against mudslinging competition you normally see online. The goal of this video is to discuss its origins, the purpose it serves, if it's still necessary, and if not, what would make a good alternative. I assume that if you clicked on this video, you're one of two kinds of people. The first being those who already know what the Trinity is and want to hear a stranger's take on the matter, and the second being those who clicked on this video because it was recommended to you and because you're bored during quarantine. In which case, sit down, buckle up, and get ready for a ride because this magic school bus has no brakes. My name is RC, and come along with me as I pen an open letter on the MMO Holy Trinity. More Rogue. Great video. The Rogue stuff should be a series, lol. I want to see a third act of the Rogue stuff. That shit was
you don't give yourself
gold.
enough
I don't know
credit.
what you're
This
talking
video was
about.
really
I would
good.
have watched
I could have
another
sat through
hour
a
of
whole
you
30
talking about
minutes
how
and
good
third
Shadowbringers
actor
is,
thought
though.
because you're
I
right.
know,
And
third actor
and
is
also,
great.
the glamours will keep me playing.
Plus the Trinity is great. Plus the players like that Rogue character is what makes these worlds feel alive. No third actor Pasta, lies.
You have been judged worthy.
I thought this accursed chapter of my life was behind me, but upon logging in one day, I'm met by her again, side by side with another of her order wearing a different, yet equally enigmatic mask. I greet them politely as I always have, and it appeared that the day I dreaded most was finally at hand, for I was judged
worthy. The elders have come. Their domain is complete.
Rogue says, and I can feel the fear rising within my chest, but at the very least I can bring their wickedness to light, cast a torch against the infinite blackness of space, for however long it would hold. I tell them to lead the way, and we descend down the stairs away from my home, for what feels like the very last time. The newcomer, Lalea, follows up the rear, keeping careful watch over me so I can't escape. I wasn't aware if she had the same eldritch energy that Rogue did, nor her insatiable appetite for her work, but it didn't matter. This was a group not to be trifled with. The Trinity has been around for a very long time, so in order to see its original purpose, we're going to need to see the first game that made use of it. Before MMORPGs, multi-user dungeons, or MUDs, were extremely popular. They were usually text-based, acting as a multiplayer equivalent of something like Zork, but with the dice rolling rules of Dungeons & Dragons. Some examples of popular MUDs of the era include Island of Kesmai in 1985, or Neverwinter Nights in 1991. But the first actual commercial MMORPG was Ultima Online, released on September 24th, 1997. In it, the concept of the Trinity as we know it today didn't seem to be as apparent. You had 6 combat-oriented classes, or trades, but you could also use the advanced character creation options to fine-tune your character to be exactly what you wanted them to be. At first glance, every class seems able to fill one particular role. Warrior and Mage dole out physical and magical damage respectively. Samurais focus on parrying enemy strikes as an effective tank. Paladins buffs and support allies with holy chivalrous magic. But what about the Ninja and Necromancer? In most modern MMOs, a Necromancer would be someone who siphons life from their enemies and makes corpses explode a la Dragon Age, and a Ninja would Beyblade Metal Fusion their way to victory. But upon closer examination of the skill lists in Ultima Online, I came upon some rather strange variations on the traditional class structure we're all used to. And this shift is present in all of the classes, not just the Ninja and Necromancer. The majority of skills and magic abilities fit the most pure, undiluted identity of the classes that use them, but there are still a vast number of abilities with a fringe use case at best. And why, you might be asking, am I sitting here discussing an almost 25-year-old game made by self-insert imperialists? Don't believe me? Just ask Lord British over here. Well, partially because those who fail to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. Failing to learn from the mistakes of your predecessors will inevitably cause your own downfall, and failing to take notes on your forebear successes is just leaving money on the table. But the main reason I'm taking a proverbial walk down the allegorical live service graveyard is because the Trinity we all know and something today wasn't always a trinity. Ultima Online showed us that classes can be more spread out in their design and coverage, with several classes having similar tools that accomplish similar goals in gameplay. However, as the years rolled on, it became increasingly apparent that giving every class an entire toolbox to mess around with instead of just giving the classes the tools they'll be using most often was a game of musical chairs on the Titanic. It was difficult to balance or tweak anything in games like this because your one change didn't just change one thing. It had a domino effect on the entire meta of the game, what certain characters could and could not accomplish, and was probably a nightmare to test. For the sake of both the players and the developers, something had to change. And out of this necessity, the Trinity was born. But wait a minute, RC, that's not a triangle, that's a damn rhombus. Well, you're right, because as I hinted earlier, the Trinity was actually, at one point, a quadrinity, a tetrinity if you will. We have the common 3 archetypes of tank, healer, and DPS, but these names didn't come about until later on. Their original names of warrior, mage, and cleric came from early editions of Dungeons & Dragons because of the similarities in their playstyles. Warriors were meant to take the most hits and keep the enemy focused on on them, the cleric kept their health topped off and buffed up party members to help them complete the encounter easier, and the mage slung spells one after the other to nuke bosses and end the encounter as quickly as possible. But that makes most of your abilities reactive rather than proactive, forcing you to remain on the back foot throughout encounters. And so, a fourth rule was created. The Mezzer. Short for Mesmerize, an ability making its debut in 1999's EverQuest, Mezzers would ensure that the balance was always in the party's favor. With extensive encounter knowledge, excellent ability to adjust on the fly, and careful use of abilities that blind, stun, silence, snare, or otherwise disable an enemy's ability to move, act, or cast, in the right hands, a Mezzer was a deadly weapon in a party's arsenal. It meant that certain problematic enemies, or sometimes entire types of enemies, could be removed from the fight for long periods of time, or failing that, limit the amount of danger they would ordinarily present to the party. It meant that instead of every fight being a DPS race against whoever was the biggest threat, fights could be broken up into smaller, bite-sized chunks and handled one at a time. But RC, you say again, if Mezzers were so useful and popular and sexy, then why did the role completely vanish? The answer is actually really fascinating because it technically didn't, at least not completely. Now that sounds really cryptic, so let me explain. At the time, Mezzers and MMOs were often invaluable to party composition, but it was far from an exact science. Knowing the full capabilities of your kit, when each ability was most useful, coordinating with your party, and all of this before the advent of the easy to use and easier to access Discord. It all added up to a role that was respected, appreciated, valued, and borderline required in those early days, and that was the problem. See, Mezzers traditionally didn't make fights faster, they made them more manageable. They didn't really focus on damage, instead spending skill points and stat distribution on ensuring that their mezzes would be active for as long as possible. In addition, a lot of these useful abilities, later called crowd control, either just straight up didn't work or were an active detriment if used incorrectly. So now you have a role that's not only critical to have, but requiring a greater degree of knowledge and skill than the average player was expected to have, and their singular defining strength was gimped at the slightest mistake. Add on the fact that it's nearly impossible to buff this role or fix any issues, as it's a creation of player ingenuity rather than explicit developer intent. Then along comes World of Warcraft in 2004, and with it, a massive change. It still had many of the little quirks and strangeness of late 90s MMOs, such as overworld PvP on some servers, eclectic class design, generic high fantasy with needlessly dense lore with too many proper fucking nouns, but one thing conspicuous by its absence was the Mezzer. Of course, there were still crowd control abilities, but they were nowhere near as powerful as they were in EverQuest, and they were no longer on one class. With every role having some kind of crowd control, a clear design focus was now set in place. Healers were meant to heal, tanks were meant to tank, and DPS was meant to kill shit and hoover up the loot like an elephant game played in reverse. And thus, the Holy Trinity was born. It's important to note that WoW didn't invent the Trinity, but it did make a very clear decision to make the roles much more defined. The genre was now headed in a new direction. But was it the right choice to make? Doesn't it limit player freedom and expression and force players to play the way that developers intend? Well, let's talk about some of the good, bad, and ugly that's come about since the inception of the Trinity. I enter the estate when a third mask-wearing member of the Cabal appears, flanking me on all sides with his compatriots. Hesitantly, I look up to see a horrific visage, some eldritch being that claws and scratches at the edge of my mind, baying for even the slightest moment of weakness. One by one they offer a prayer, then turn to Rogue, clearly the Lady of Honor in tonight's proceedings.
They speak truths, whispers.
Despite myself, I relent the beauty and majesty of such a creature, and it's at this point that I feel powerless to stop. I kneel at the altar, praying that someone, anyone, will allow me to leave this place unharmed.
They foretell of those who lurk below. Only those of ankle strong will survive.
They cleanse themselves in the nearby purifying waters, and I stand, motionless, every move deliberate, for I know not what they have in store for me.
Judgment is sought above. Justice is found below.
Rogue elaborates as the other two file out of the room and up the stairs, and it soon becomes clear that the judgment they bring to bear is both almighty and ironclad. They each take their positions around the room, Nara taking the role of jury, Laleia the stenographer, and lastly, high above us all now in every sense, is Rogue, the judge.
Speak your truths. The elders listen.
I take a deep breath and state my case, carefully choosing my words. Bear in mind that all I say is the complete truth. I only sought to document my encounters here to bring light to this organization, this collective. I meant no ill will.
Collective.
Laleia ponders.
Your will is for the elders to decide.
And with little further ceremony, I'm brought downstairs and into the basement to face my justice. I'm led by the Namazu masked man around the back of the crude stage enclosure, and he stands, waiting for me to drop down as he begins to dance. One by one, they make their way to stand beside their leader, and one by one, they point at me.
Would you like to see the stuffed turkey dinner for 3 room?
Rogue asks. There is no judgment in this place, only truth. Somehow, this didn't make me feel any better. I tell them that whatever truths they would bestow upon me, I would gladly witness.
Room 1.
Rogue says before phasing through solid matter. Oh, I see it now. The reason I was spared. I was one of them now. Now that the Mezzer as a role class amalgamate is gone, we can talk about the world of good that the Trinity has done for us as MMO players. Now, if you know me personally, or if you've seen the Destiny 2 video I uploaded in August, you'll know that I'm a pretty big proponent of the Trinity. And while I certainly recognize and acknowledge the problems that arises from its existence, which we'll get into later, I'd like to take the next few minutes to sing its praises. First, since its inception, it has allowed for a much more streamlined approach to designing combat encounters, as well as attracting new players to join us in the myriad of games we play. It's now much more clear exactly what each class is supposed to do, what responsibilities it has, and what is best left for others to handle. Also, people who argue against the Trinity like to state, often incorrectly, that roles not focused solely on DPS have zero tools other than ones that further their own damage. Even in Final Fantasy XIV, a game that I play religiously, people claim this, and it's literally just false. Do we have as much as we used to in 4.0 and 3.0? No, we don't, not even close. Have the jobs been streamlined by a large degree, and do they still need a lot of work? Yes, absolutely. But to say that we have zero tools that aren't about damage is untrue. Personally, I really like being able to focus solely on DPS, having a ton of options as to how I accomplish that goal. It lets me worry about my own improvement first and foremost. And in 14, every class accomplishes this goal differently, even if it all appears very cookie cutter from the outset. A good ninja has their haste buff up constantly, they use their trick attack on cooldown, pumping their highest damage abilities in ninjutsu while it's active, and moves away from the boss only when absolutely necessary. Knowing exactly what that job is and fine-tuning that on an individual level based on the fight I'm about to challenge is extremely fun to me. I don't have to constantly adapt on the fly with fringe case abilities that may be useful. Instead of adding a few more plates that I have to keep spinning, I can say fuck the plates and summon a frog. And yet I still have a stun, an anti-knockback that slows enemies that hit me, a baby self-heal, a cripple, and an ability that gives me extra sustain by doing damage. Second, it's also allowed developers an important compass to navigate the already murky world of post-release development. I mentioned before that without the Trinity as we know it, it was likely borderline impossible to make any kind of noticeable non-numerical change to games at the time because of the far-reaching domino effect. It was literally impossible to predict what kind of end result you'd be leaving the players with even when doing small tweaks, and that is now no longer the case. Developers can now make adjustments as grandiose or minuscule as they feel comfortable doing because they can largely predict what effect that's going to have on the players and their playstyles. This allows the developers to give us new challenges that make us think on our feet without unintentionally designing a disproportionately difficult or easy encounter. They have all the information they need directly in front of them and will use it to the best of their ability. The fact that so many people scream and whine on fucking GameFAQs forums because Yoshi P took their Hot Wheels away and gave them a bouncy ball instead for the sole reason that when they had the Hot Wheels they kept dipping it in paint and driving it all over the walls is absurd to me. I realize the metaphor has lost the plot a little bit, but bear with me. Many of those who dislike the Trinity wholeheartedly believe that it isn't a matter of streamlining or ease of development at all, but rather a concerted effort to take tools away from us, thus making the game easier to play and more appealing to players who wouldn't have been able to play at high level at all as it stood before the changes. They claim that it locks the players into a one-size-fits-all playstyle that can't be experimented with or optimized. I vehemently disagree with this notion, and it's demonstrably false. The thing with optimization is that it's a never-ending rabbit hole, and once you fall down it, you're going to keep falling. The top players in this game complain that they took the most interesting optimization tools away from classes they previously enjoyed, making them less fun to play than they had been previously. And I don't doubt that they genuinely mean this, but it's kind of a necessary evil. If you base your entire game's balance around the top 100 players of each region, then many players will be left by the wayside. Players that are new to an otherwise excellent MMO, have poor connections, or even have disabilities are likely not going to be able to play. Square Enix does want the game to be as marketable as possible, obviously, but this isn't some no-name company with no established track record. It's Square fucking Enix. Players who wholeheartedly believe that the devs are solely interested in marketability over every other aspect of the game are, frankly, delusional. My point is that when it comes to optimization, if you give every player access to the same tools, no matter how clunky, someone somewhere will math out the exact perfect application of those tools. And it just so happens that those players will inevitably upload their inflated logs to FF logs and gatekeep Party Finder with shit like this. Whether the devs succeeded or failed is up for discussion, but their efforts are all in the name of player satisfaction. They've said so themselves. I mentioned this before in the Destiny 2 video, but in making a larger number of players happier, a small fraction of them will become discontented. But what is it that you want? Do you want healers to have a complex DPS rotation that will add to the distractions that healers face in roulette content? Do you want obtuse mechanics that largely get ignored in favor of damage buffs anyway, like Astro's old cards and Royal Road leading to balance fishing, all for the sake of novelty? No. As much as you bitch and complain about the removal, you don't want these things. You say you do, you think you do, but you don't, because it's your fault they're gone. Too many healers were focusing almost entirely on DPS, which led to bosses being killed far too quickly, resulting in fights that were too easy for top-level players and nearly impossible for everyone else, until a few patches later when the eye level inevitably catches up. Every healer in general would only focus on healing or mitigating unavoidable unavoidable damage at the top level. Guess what? You got exactly what you asked for with your behavior, whether you were aware of it or not. Square Enix looked at the numbers, at the ability use timeline, and said, oh, they clearly aren't using these other tools, let's get rid of them to make healing less clunky and more engaging. If all they care about is damage, let's make that the focus. You have no one to blame but yourself for falling down this rabbit hole, and I'm sick to fucking death of people bashing on a company that works its ass off for us. You structure your lives around patch day, have pocket crafters there with you, giving you every slight advantage just so you can run the world's first rat race, mainlining the content the devs worked so hard for into your fucking veins, and then you have the nerve to turn around and claim the developers don't care. To the people who act like this, who will inevitably go down to the comments to engage in the impotent shit flinging, it's best you shut the fuck up now and move along, because I check comments frequently and you will be banned on site. I don't care. I have better shit to do with my time than babysit a bunch of man children with the comprehensive skills of a bowl of Rice Krispies with none of the snap, crackle, and pop they think their oh so witty reply has. Okay, tangent over. With my options getting thinner by the moment, I placed my faith in my newfound eldritch powers and I did it! The elation I felt was curbed somewhat though by what I instinctively knew was the last poor unfortunate to make their way here. I thanked the elders for blessing me, for finding me. I make my way back to the main floor and enter Rogue's bedroom and am met with an admittedly lovely, if dark, office. I'm told to inspect the closets and make haste to do so. The first is a room covered wall to wall in hopefully empty cartons of milk. I hoped they were empty, but Rogue quickly shot down that delusion. It was upon inspecting the other one though that I began to feel unclean. She makes direct eye contact with me as she sits and enjoys her meal, served directly from the head of some unlucky subhuman that had come into contact with them. Ignoring my questions as to the quality of the meal, she says that there is more to show, and I am quick to follow.
12.
She says, leading me to a room filled almost floor to ceiling with wheels and wedges of cheese. Rogue explains that this is where they keep all they deem of material worth.
24 is our other shrine.
Another prayer is offered here, and I join in the revelry. She pulls out her familiar black parasol, and I pull out one of my own and stand at her side. As we stand there, gazing upon beauty in its truest form, eldritch magics began to envelop my new patron. She looks to me, and for the very first time, I can see something other than the truly unknowable in her eyes. I see respect. I see acknowledgement of potential. I hope you can all understand that I can't allow our location to be revealed. We wouldn't want too many nosy faces to join the collection, now would we? For now, I leave the abode, comfortable in the knowledge I've learned and with the power I've been granted. While this chapter of our tale has drawn to a close, do not be sad that it has ended. Smile that it happened, and be prepared, and only those with ankles strong will survive. I'm a big fan of eclectic class design. The wackier it is, the more I want it. I love messing around with cool and funky abilities that are often at my own detriment, partially because I'm a crackhead who only gets rewarded with serotonin when she writes a run-on sentence, but mainly because it's really fun, even if suboptimal. With all that said, Final Fantasy XIV isn't exactly the most free game in existence. Events unfold much more like a single-player RPG with MMO elements rather than a true blue MMORPG. Granted, that's why I like it so much, but as for the Trinity, it's got a pretty clear stranglehold on 14. As much as I pitched a bitch fit when talking about Astrologian's old card system, I would have absolutely adored using it. Giving out crit buffs, helping tanks mitigate tank busters, all of it sounds absolutely mouth-watering. Hell, even Bard had a bunch of cool and wacky abilities that rocketed them to the top of many people's radar, to the point that they were brought in damn near every top-performing static in the early days of the game. Foe's Requiem, Refresh, and many other abilities just disappeared with no serviceable replacements to be found. This left Bard in a very sorry state for Shadowbringers. Its buff timings are weird and don't line up with the rest of the buffs in the game, their theming and narrative identities as party supports has been gutted and gifted to Dancer on a silver platter. It's just a mess. But all this did is swap one problem for another. At the highest levels of play, there is no reason to bring machinists because of their difficulty double weaving due to ping and snapshotting. There's no reason to bring bards because of the absolute state of current bard class design. And so we're left with Dancer in the exact same position that Bard was pre-Shadowbringers, a borderline requirement in every top performing static and raid group, with lots of sparkly abilities, impactful cooldowns, etc. It's no wonder that people are A, so angry at Dancer for robbing Bard of all of its identity, and B, fearful that Dancer will end up in the same position that Bard is now once 6.0 arrives. And even though I don't play these classes personally, I'm just as worried. There's this creeping fear that classes that I love playing, like Red Mage or Ninja, will have their best, most defining features gutted or outright stolen by other classes, and that's not a good feeling. Furthermore, there are a ton of interesting jobs in the Final Fantasy canon, no matter how obscure, that will more than likely never exist in 14 because the Trinity community simply will not allow for it. The current design has no room for classes that don't outright contribute to healing, buffs, threat generation, mitigation, crowd control, and damage. And this extends to encounter design as well. DPS is ultimately the most important metric, both on part of the players wanting to do as much of it as possible and on part of the developers having to predict how much damage players will be doing in the future. But let me ask you this, why does Warden's Paeon exist? It saves healers one singular GCD casting Esuna. It doesn't get used, not because it isn't valuable, but because there aren't many fights in the game with Essunable mechanics, let alone one that has unavoidable healing going out on top of it, heavily incentivizing bards being brought along to help the healers. But you know something? I kinda prefer it this way. I said earlier that Square Enix have made their best efforts to balance the game around the highest majority of its player base, which will naturally gravitate towards the playstyle that the Trinity represents. They've also done their best to balance the game in a way that allows any class in the same role to serve as an adequate replacement, so that no job is a must in any group. But there still are some examples of what they're trying to avoid being present in the game. In every successful static, you will see a ninja. Why? Because their abilities are designed well, they're useful, impactful, and have a degree of skill required in order to maximize their potential. A poorly timed trick attack means that all your allies' strongest abilities won't gain the benefit of that damage increase, and while it won't outright kill you, it could very well lead to a wipe if your group can't clear a DPS check. They don't just backflip around the boss, constantly spamming attacks mindlessly like a monk. They aren't a clunky, neglected relic from a bygone era of design philosophy like Bard. Their presence brings something valuable, and their absence is sorely missed. So when I shit-talk Bard's useless abilities, gutted kit, and lack of direction, this isn't a rallying cry for fights with a bunch of debuffs that need to be cleansed. Quite the opposite, actually. Square Enix have recently taken the stance of buffing existing classes that are not seeing as much play, because they want to bring them closer in line with the other classes within the same role. Yet they're not fixing some of the glaring problems that many classes face, like Scholar's Fairy abilities getting ghosted and not going off, or Bard. This speaks to a more fundamental issue, and one that I truly think will get addressed and utterly obliterated in 6.0. So many classes have gotten lobotomized, as so many Redditors say, in the name of role unity, and I truly can't see them just ignoring this glaring warning sign that the players are flashing in front of their faces. And I think that's the reason so many people complain. It's out of a sense of frustration more than anything else. They're frustrated that the classes that they have loved for years have fallen into a state of neglect, and it hurts. I feel for you, everyone, I really do. If my mains had gotten gimped that hard, then I'd be pretty ornery too, not to mention anxious and contemplating quitting altogether. But where do we go from here? Well, we don't really have anywhere to go, unless it's to other games, and I think that's just trading one set of problems for another. For better or for worse, I really love this game, warts and all, and I know many of you out there do too. So maybe can we just put down the pitchforks and torches a while and celebrate the things we do enjoy? Embrace the good changes for however long we have them? Like Red Mage is getting buffed in 5.4. Sorry again, Bard mains, you'll get your rework someday. Signed, RC.